Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate Day 434, Friday, May the 18th, 2018. Thank you so much for tuning in. Alrighty, boy, got a lot to cover today. It's going to focus totally on this Crossfire Hurricane article by the New York Times. Quite a bit to cover here. It's probably going to be a two-video situation. I just don't think I can do it all in 30 minutes. It's probably going to take longer than that. So, because there's like 17 different things I want to get to here specifically, as well as a general overview of what I think of this article and where it's coming from and why it came out and all that. So let me go ahead and jump right into it. So anyway, let's get right to this. First of all, I want to just give you a general overview, my gut feeling after reading the article 3 or 4 times. It reminded me a lot of when I was in college and had a writing class and we had to write some various types of papers. And I remember 2 of the papers we had to write. One of them was called an informative paper, which is a paper you would write that would try to inform somebody about something. And then we had to write another type of paper, and that type of paper was a persuasive paper. It was a paper where you pick a topic and you try to persuade someone to a particular point of view. These 2 different types of papers have a completely different feel, and they would both have a different feel from what you would normally see in a newsprint article. When you read this, it becomes glaringly obvious, almost laughingly, in fact I was openly laughing at points during the story, reading it, that this is clearly a persuasive writing in this story. And they are trying to represent someone's point of view in opposition to something else or someone else's point of view. It's as if this is a piece that had a narrator or someone who wrote a story that was supposed to persuade the reader to think a certain thing. They wrote this up, sent it over to the New York Times, threw a couple reporters and an editor on it, and they cleaned it up, wrote the article, and published it. That's what it looks like. It does not look like your typical New York Times type article, where they just tell you who said what, who did what, when, where, how, all these things. No, this is very much a very personal writing. It's someone with some skin in the game, someone with something at stake, who is trying to defend something or someone. That is the general feel of the article itself when you read it. Someone is trying to get you to adopt a point of view. And another way that you can tell this is true is when you are aware of a lot of facts, as most of us are here on these TowerGate videos, as we've been following this story for a long time. When you're aware of a lot of facts, as the people at the New York Times who are writing this story or alleged to have written this story would be, you would include all the pertinent facts. But as you can see when you read through the article, it's picking and choosing certain facts, picking and choosing certain little bits of information, expanding on them, and then of course you feel the personal bias that comes in as the facts are. Facts are never just laid out there in a statement. They're always buttressed by something that would justify something in the fact. It's really obvious. It's really obvious. It's like I said, if you haven't read it, go read the New York Times article, Crossfire Hurricane, and I think you'll find you'll be laughing by the time you get down toward the middle of the article. So that's the general feeling of the overall story that they've written here. And it reminds me a lot, an awful lot, of the last time the New York Times did this type of a piece. It was back on December the 30th of 2017. If you remember what was happening at that time, everyone was really scrutinizing the testimony of Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS. They had leaked out his testimony. The issue of the dossier was back front and center. Everyone was talking about it, and it was taking a beating. It was taking a beating. It was getting beat down. And after about 2 weeks of total beatdown, with the dossier now almost completely debunked, other than what was public open source information in the dossier, at that point we get this article that dropped on December 30th, 2017, and that article totally flipped the narrative to, oh, it wasn't anything to do with the dossier that started the investigation. It was this meeting between Papadopoulos and Down the Hatch Downer in London. A drunken conversation, by the way. That's what started it all. Had nothing to do with the dossier. They had to totally flip the narrative from the dossier to the Papadopoulos Downer meeting. Totally flipped the narrative. At which point, everyone within the next 24 hours, including myself, came out, read the article, pointed out the obvious problems with it all over the place, and the same type of real personal feel, writing it from a position that's defending somebody or something, the whole 9 yards. It was debunked within 24 hours. We know that they never, the words Papadopoulos, as far as we know, up to this point, have never been uttered or written anywhere in any of the FISA, the 4 FISA court requests for surveillance, or in the, we've never seen it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but never. And I would think if it did exist, they would have shown that to Nunes, because they need that. That would have helped them. But they can't find it. No one can find it. No one can find anywhere where in any of the 4 FISA warrants that they said anything about Papadopoulos. He popped up. He didn't pop up until December 30th, 2017. And we also know that if he was the person, and he was the reason they started the investigation, they didn't interview him until 5 months and 2 weeks after they opened the investigation. It just doesn't fly. And there's a lot of problems with Papadopoulos. That was the exact same type of story, but something else that both these stories have in common, which makes it real obvious there's something really bad going on. And that is that in that first story, just like this story, you get quite a few brand new bits of information that we didn't have before. You also, which would be things that would be unredacted, or things that they would never release or let us know. They won't tell Nunes. That they'll fight him for months and months and months, and other committees trying to get this information, but the very information that they won't give to Nunes or anyone else, they'll leak to the New York Times. We had probably 5 or 6 new pieces of information that came in that December 30th article from the New York Times of 2017. We also had quite a few things that were suspected but never proven, which were verified. We also had in that article a whole bunch on almost every claim that they made or fact that they dropped. They would preface it by saying, you know, FBI officials or government officials or law enforcement officials or you know, officials within the intelligence community. They'll give us titles of the individuals who supposedly gave them the information. Their sources. Never give a name. Only give like law enforcement official or intelligence people in the know, in intelligence circles. All these people, but the stuff that they're dropping and telling us in that article would not be stuff that's just known to the average rank and file mid-level bureaucrat in any of these places. Only people at the very top of the food chain who would have been involved in these things would have had that type of information. It was so closely held by these people that, again, these congressional committees who have oversight authority and the security clearances could not even get that information. And when they did get some of these documents, they're completely redacted. Yet these individuals will contact the New York Times and give them the information. And what? We have none of this information. All of a sudden, one day, this New York Times reporter wakes up, and there's what? 5 intelligence officials, 3 FBI officials, 2 DOJ officials, all these people, what? They just suddenly, on the same day, all woke up and decided to feed the New York Times a bunch of classified information that's being withheld, information that's usually redacted when they do get reports. You see, it's the exact same thing. These 2 articles are identical in exactly the way they read, how they feel, that personal thing to them, that almost like there's a narrator there, like they're trying to persuade you. They pick and choose facts. They drop truth bombs. They drop classified information that's not even available. It's like the Washington Post article that spurred all this stuff about the FBI informant. Here, Nunes is trying to find out if there is an FBI informant and what his name might be, and then they won't tell him. He's threatening subpoenas to him, and then they literally drop that information on the Washington Post. Nunes is in there being told he can't get this information when they gave it to the Washington Post. They know the name of the source. They'll give it to the Washington Post, but they won't give it to Devin Nunes. Everyone in town knows exactly who we're talking about with this informant, we believe, is Mr. Halper, Stephen Halper. Nunes probably knows it. Just about everybody knows it, but they still will not come off of it. They will not let him see that unredacted name. But they'll sure as hell send it over to the Washington Post, or the New York Times, or BuzzFeed, or CNN. This is exactly what you see in this article, Crossfire Hurricane. It is almost a carbon copy of the same feel, the same type of selection of facts, these dropping these truth bombs, classified information that we've never been able to get that all of a sudden they get. Just the whole thing. It's the exact same type of thing. So, something else that you'll notice, which was very similar, in that first article that they dropped on December 30th, 2017, New York Times, when they tried to flip the narrative from the dossier to the Papadopoulos meeting with Alexander Down the Hatch Downer, that whole story had a feel to it like it was protecting the Department of Justice and putting the onus on certain individuals within the FBI counterintel. And that is exactly what this article also does. This article, if I had to guess who was the narrators or the people who pumped this over to the New York Times, I would say it's people, high-level people probably, within the DOJ. And they may have some connection to Comey. They may have some connection to Loretta Lynch. It may be coming from... It could be any of these people. We just don't know. But clearly what they're trying to do in this article is protect the top tier of the Department of Justice officials, while pretending, or saying in this article, suggesting that this was an operation, Crossfire Hurricane, was something that was very closely held, being run only within counterintelligence, and that the DOJ was largely being kept in the dark. Even Comey was being kept in the dark. The CIA, the only mention of intelligence agencies or CIA in the entire piece is they have one or two sentences in there where they confirm that Brennan shared intelligence, so-called intelligence, with the FBI in the middle of August. And then right at the beginning of the article, they talk a little bit about the IC document. But other than that, practically the intel community almost completely doesn't exist in this story. It's like they had no role. They didn't exist. They basically take this story and try to make it all revolve around a very small group of people within the counterintelligence division of the FBI, and everyone else is almost got like a protective shield around them. This is why I believe this came from either Comey, possibly McCabe. Possibly McCabe and Comey working together, possibly Yates. There's a group of individuals, if you ask me, that have decided that they are going to pull their horses together, circle their wagons, and defend their territory. That's what it looks like to me. So, in other words, as I've said many times, when the heat starts to build, eventually the perps have to start thinking about their defense. And this article appears to show the beginning developments of who is going to go to what corner and stand with whom against the others. And it looks like at this point there's a small group within the DOJ, Department of Justice, that are going to try to stick together and insulate themselves and try to shift the blame for the crimes over to this small group of people in the DOJ, the FBI Counterintelligence Division, and it looks like they're trying to also protect Clapper and Brennan, because you hardly, in fact, Clapper's name I don't think is hardly mentioned even one time in the article, and Brennan hardly ever. And they had a massive amount to do with this whole thing. So you can see clearly that there's a lot going on with this article. That it's got a lot of problems. It should be viewed as propaganda, disinformation, and shouldn't be taken seriously. But because there are certain things in here where, quite honestly, I'm glad they wrote the article, and if I was a prosecutor, I would be very happy with this article, because I've got a lot of good things to go to work on in this article to uncover perps. And there's a lot of specific things that are in here that are new information, or information that was suspected but never confirmed, which is now we can assume confirmed because they're dropping these sources. Law enforcement officials say, intelligence officials say, people close to this bureau say, I mean, all this type of stuff. All of a sudden, all these people coming out of the woodwork. But it looks like to me, from the very beginning, as this is starting to develop, and we'll see a lot more of this once the IG report comes out and we see who gets the finger pointed at them. But it looks like to me that what you're going to have is the Department of Justice and their defense, and those people at the DOJ are going to be pointing the finger at FBI counterintelligence and saying, hey, we believed it all. I mean, they were giving us this information about Trump-Russia collusion. We believed it was real. We believed it was true. So we had no choice. I mean, so yeah, we did what we did, but only because we believed. We didn't know we were being duped. It was those guys in FBI counterintelligence that were duping us. That appears to be what whoever is behind this Department of Justice people, and maybe Comey and McCabe along with them, even though they're FBI, they're trying to insulate themselves from counterintelligence. It looks like Department of Justice and McCabe and Comey and top tier people are going to try to point the finger over at Counterintel and make them look like a bunch of bumbling idiots who got it all wrong and took a series of coincidences and mistook them for crimes. And then, so what you're going to have then is the DOJ pointing at FBI counterintelligence as being the culprits in this big mistake, which is how they'll try to play it off as a big mistake. And at which point, then you're going to have counterintelligence. They're going to turn around and say, hey, what do you mean? Don't point the finger at us. We were just going along our normal business, and then fixing the Rotten Reverend Clinton email investigation and covering that up, when all of a sudden, here comes the CIA, John Brennan, with this intelligence, unofficial intelligence, which he gave to the director, in which case he put us on this investigation. So hey, it's not us and counterintelligence that got all this going. It was them, the CIA and the Director of National Intelligence, Clapper. They're the ones that fed us this stuff and sent us on this wild goose chase. They're the ones that are responsible. So as you can see, it's already developing into the finger pointing, and it's going to be the DOJ pointing the finger at Counterintel for misleading them, and then Counterintel pointing the finger back at intelligence and saying that was an intelligence community that got all this started. They misled us. So they're all going to be pointing fingers at each other, claiming that they were duped, that they really believed the information they were being given, that there was nothing political going on, there was no bias toward the Trump administration. Throughout this piece, they're constantly trying to paint this picture that, we didn't want to move quickly on this investigation. We didn't want to interview people around the Trump campaign because we can't have there be any effect. Our jobs cannot have any effect on a presidential election. We can't have that happen. It's too pristine. We have to protect the presidential elections. We can't be involved in having anything that might sway the elections. I swear to you, this is a narrative, a theme that's in the backdrop throughout the whole thing is based on this. That everything that they were doing, they're trying to be very careful. They don't want to affect the elections. They're trying to sniff out the perps. I mean, the whole 9 yards. It's they're mistaking coincidence for crime. I mean, this entire thing is a cover your ass story, and it seems to want to assess blame on FBI's counterintelligence division, away from the Justice Department and away from the intelligence community. I don't think it's going to work. Now, with that in mind, I am now going to begin to go through specific paragraphs or sentences in this article and shine some light of truth on them. So, let's get started. I believe there are 17 of these that I'm going to go through, which means it will be 2 videos today, because we only have, let's see, about 11 minutes left, and then, so that won't be enough time to get through these. So yeah, it's going to be 2 videos. Okay, let me go to the very first thing, and I began at the top of the article and worked my way to the bottom. So let's go to the very top of the article, and here's one thing that is pretty much confirmed now, which we weren't really sure about, but now we can be confirmed of. In that first paragraph of this story, it says that the FBI dispatched a pair of agents to go to London and meet with the Australian official. That would be Alexander Down the Hatch Downer. And so what they're talking about here is that allegedly Downer gets this information from Papadopoulos. He sits on it for 2 months. Then he passes that information to the Australian State Department, who then passes it on to the American State Department, who then somehow gets to the FBI, at which point they, based on this information coming from Downer, passed through the channels, that he had a conversation with Papadopoulos back on May the 10th, and Papadopoulos said that he had heard that there were some hacked, Russians had some hacked Hillary emails. And so they open an official counterintelligence operation on the 28th of July, 2016, based on that. And then it's 2 days later, after they've opened the counterintelligence investigation, because of the information they got passed down through the chain from Downer to the FBI. It's 2 days after they opened the counterintelligence investigation into Trump and associates for collusion with Russia that Strzok and who we believe to be now Lisa Page are dispatched to London. Now, if you read through all those emails as or text messages as Andrew McCarthy did from the American Spectator, you will see and you will identify a particular conversation that's going on between Strzok and Page, where Page is essentially asking, or she obviously had been trying to get Peter Strzok to see if she could go along on this trip to London. And apparently she gets the all clear, the thumbs up. So when we see this phrase in here, in this story in the New York Times, that they dispatched a pair of FBI agents to go to London, to the Australian embassy, to meet with Downer, this is who they're talking about. Peter's been stroking us and loose Lisa Page. But when you read the conversation that they're having in the text messages, you'll see that it's not just Peter's been stroking us and loose Lisa Page, because they're talking about the airline reservations and who's going to go on the same flight. And they're talking about 2 other people who will be going, but they'll probably be on a different flight. And then Lisa Page is complaining about her seat and suggesting she should have switched seats with this other person who appears to be a female. And the male they name is John. Now, I forgot this guy's name. I'll have to go to Mora's list and scroll down and try to find his name, because it pops in my head from time to time and back out again. But this is the guy, I'm pretty sure, who was the guy, the lawyer for the DOJ, NSD, who right after they got the FISA warrant resigned or went and took another job with someone else. John somebody. I believe that's who they're talking about. He and some female with him, apparently. So even though this New York Times story wants to tell us that they dispatched a pair, it looks as if there were 2 pair of people dispatched to London. But at least in this story, for sure, the New York Times Crossfire Hurricane story confirms that they dispatched at least 1 pair, and that would be Strzok and loose Lisa Page. So this is new information or confirmed information. And no one really thought much about it until this came out, and then Andrew McCarthy pointed out that he too had stumbled onto that when he was reading through the texts, and so he pointed that out, and so now we have verified pretty much that at least one pair of FBI agents was sent there. Now keep in mind the incredible thing that we're talking about here, that they got this information, which would have been hearsay evidence, through these channels from the Australian State Department to the U.S. State Department, the FBI, and based on that, largely, that's what they're telling us, they opened this investigation, a counterintelligence operation, despite the fact that this intelligence they had was essentially unofficial intelligence. Devin Nunes is asked to see on the EC or anywhere else an actual evidence that you would need to launch a criminal investigation. The FBI nor any other investigative agency doesn't just launch investigations because of a hunch, because of curiosity or anything else. You actually have to have some probable cause that a crime has been committed or something. You generally do, and if you do see where there might be something going on, you might interview a couple people, and then once you decide that, yeah, there's something going on here, then you go to someone and say, yeah, I think we need to open an official investigation, because you need to budget dollars for it, you need to budget people for it, you need to get a plan, you need to have an official document or something. And this appears to have never been done. They launched an official investigation based on unofficial hearsay evidence. There was no probable cause. Then, what does Strzok and allegedly Page do? They go over to London 2 days after they've already opened the investigation based on the hearsay evidence. And who do they interview? Well, at this point, as far as we know, the only person they interviewed was Alexander Down the Hatch Downer. Now, maybe they did interview someone else. But if they did, we don't know about it. We do not know about it. As far as we know, the only person Peter's been stroking has talked to was Down the Hatch Downer. Now, something about this gets into very basic investigations. When I was in class for private investigations, going to school for private investigations, you're not going to like this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. When you are a cop or any type of detective investigator, you investigate both sides of the story. You never assume anything. In other words, let's just say that you suspect that your neighbor down the street's kid stole your lawnmower out of your garage, and you call the cops because you have seen the kid around. He's always hanging around. You know he's always getting into trouble. You suspect he's guilty of foul play. You didn't see him take your lawnmower, but you're pretty damn sure he's the one that took your lawnmower. You call the cops. They come to your house, and you want to file a police report and have them check and see if they can find out if this kid took your lawnmower. I can assure you, my friends, that you'll probably notice when you do that as the cop is asking you questions, at some point he begins to ask some other types of questions that make you feel very uncomfortable. Because what's he doing? He's checking you out. He's checking you out. We are trained. I was trained. Cops are trained. Detectives are trained. When you make a police report, you are going to be investigated for making the report. Because a lot of times people who make the report, sometimes the old expression, the smeller is the feller. That's right. You make a police report to a cop, I can promise you they're going to look into you first. They're going to go back to their office and they're going to dig into you a little bit, because now they got your information. That's why when they walk up to you and you want to make the criminal complaint, or you want them to check it out, the very first things they're asking you is your name. They're writing down your address. They're getting your contact information. They're getting every bit of information you will give them about you. Because the first thing they're going to do when they get back to their office, if they're a patrolman, they'll give it to a detective. They're going to check you out. They're going to run a credit report. They're going to take a look at your criminal history. They're going to check you out, see how many times you have called the cops to your house, How many police contacts have you had? Have you had your license revoked? Have you had a DUI? Have you had a drug charge, a domestic abuse charge? Have you had anything? Is there anything? Have you had a dispute with these neighbors before? Have the cops been here before? This is all, they're going, before they even start thinking about investigating the guy you think stole your lawnmower, they are going to figure out what you're all about, my friends. I hate to tell you that, but that's the truth, okay? So, then they're going to go look into whether or not someone stole your lawnmower. There's a lot of times when people call the cops to complain about someone else, and they're the ones that get taken away in handcuffs. Happens every day, my friends. So that is what you will learn if you go to school to become an investigator, okay? So working from that theory, and you always want to identify first, interview first the real target. Then the person saying something about the target, you go get them second, and then you come back to the original target for a re-interview. That's how that's done. But that's not what Ben Strokinus did here. No. He did the opposite. He should have went and talked to Papagalopoulos first. It's Papagalopoulos who's the one who made the statement. Hey, I heard that the Russians got Hillary's hacked emails. He's the guy that you should have been talking to first. And then you ask him, we heard this. Hey, do you know this guy named Downer? What can you tell me about him? And then let him tell you how he came to have this conversation with Mr. Downer. See if he tells you anything. Let him tell you. You don't lead him. You just hit him with it. By the way, Mr. Papagalopoulos, now that you've told me how you learned, okay, so if you go there and you talk to Papagalopoulos first, which is what he should have done first, they should have got to Papagalopoulos first, said, hey, hi, I'm from the FBI, Peter Strzok's my name, hey, we're just doing a routine investigation, we're just checking out on something, no big deal, Pops. But we heard that you had some information that maybe the Russians had hacked Hillary Clinton emails. Is that true? And where did you learn about that? In which case, Papagalopoulos is going to say, well, I heard it from this professor I met at Cambridge University named Professor Misford. He's the one who told me he heard from some government officials that they got some hacked Hillary Clinton emails. Really? Wow, that's very interesting. Did you tell anyone else? Well, I did tell this one guy, an Australian diplomat, his name's Downer. Yeah, Downer, I think I know who that guy is. What exactly happened there? And now, what you do? Did you call Downer? No, Papagalopoulos said, no, he called me. Well, actually, someone else called me and arranged a meeting with Downer. Oh, do you know who that is? And you see what I mean? This is how you do it. And then you go back to Downer. And then you say, hey, yeah, we got your report. We're working on that right now. By the way, did you call him or did he call you? And then you see if they agree on who called who. And then you work from there and you find out who the liar is. And then you go back to your first source and you try to sort out the lies. That is how you conduct criminal investigation. Mr. Strzok, something stinks. This is Deputy Dog 101. This is Barney Fife stuff. I'm not buying it. It's time to go to the second video. I'll see you on video 2, and we'll continue on. Thank you.